Hello, everybody. My name is Doris Rusch, and I will be your teacher for this semester for a course called Making Deep Games. And some of you might know me, and some of you might not. And even if you already know me, this is a very brief introduction of who I am, particularly who I am in the context of this course, because I find it quite important to have some kind of context and some kind of idea of who is teaching this and why are they teaching this, so you can make better informed decisions about your own approach and how to take the things that you will hear and hopefully learn in this course. So making deep games, there will be a longer deep dive into what are deep games and why should we bother with them. But I've been thinking about how we can make games that are about the human experience in a broad general sense and tackle complex, abstract concepts, emotional concepts for the last 15 years. I am now an associate professor / docent for game design at Uppsala University, but I've been at MIT before that at the Gambit Game Lab and DePaul University in Chicago. And over all of these years, I have taught different versions of this Deep Games course and then have been approached by a publisher, Taylor and Francis. And they asked me to write a book about it. And I did. And so there is also a book, and a lot of the reading materials for this course are chapters from the book. And I spare you the price of having to buy it. So don't worry about that. Okay, my background is actually in the humanities, so I am not terribly technical. I can talk to programmers by now, I think, having done a lot of projects, team projects and development projects. But my background is in literature, film, and theater from the University of Vienna in Austria. My PhD is in applied linguistics and interactive systems. Nobody quite knows what that means. You don't really need to worry about the details here, but it shows that I have a really, really deep interest in language as a window to how people think and how they feel and how they express themselves. And interactive systems, they're just really fascinating to me because everything from human social relationships to biological systems to computer systems is a web of interrelated elements, and how all of that interrelates and how we can express things through these relationships, through the rules that govern actions and behaviors. That's really awesome and really fascinating. And it's also the core of what lots of game design is about. After getting a PhD in Vienna, I became a game design researcher at MIT, the Gambit Game Lab. I already mentioned that. I was there for 3.5 years. And then co-founded a game design consulting company in Vienna called Game Gestalt. And we did a lot of consulting, as the name says, and non-digital prototyping and talking to non-profit organizations and teaching workshops on how to make games about different things like Holocaust education and how to teach agile development and all sorts of things. And then I went back to academia. I did tenure track and tenure at DePaul University. And when I was there, I founded this and was the creative director of the Deep Games Lab. And this ran for a few years, and we made a lot of different projects that I will talk about in a second. I worked a lot with students on development projects, and that was really rewarding and stressful and insightful. And I learned so much, and I hope they learned a lot too. And I'm hoping to do something similar here as well with the Games and Society Lab. And since last spring, so not that long, I've been a senior lecturer at Uppsala University. I did a TEDx talk. If you want to know what I'm actually really about and where I'm coming from with how to use game design to understand the human experience, I did a TEDx talk that's called Why Game Designers Are Better Lovers. And I apologize for the really clickbaity title. It worked and it backfired. But yeah, so there it is. Really, really early games that I made include Acrasia and Elude. So I'm just talking about this briefly so you have some idea of what kind of game designer I am and what has driven my exploration of game design as an expressive tool and games as a means to understand aspects of the human experience. It's not that I think these are the best games ever made, by God, no. But they are interesting experiments, and they got really quite some recognition over the years from different kinds of festivals like Indicate or Meaningful Play, Serious Play, and won all sorts of awards, which I'm sharing with you not to brag, but to maybe inspire you and encourage you that you don't have to have big, super polished titles to gain some attention for what you're doing, because conceptual depth can go a really, really long way. And as you're thinking about building your portfolio and creating your identity as a game designer, paying attention to that conceptual depth can really give you an edge over all the other many aspiring game designers that are out there. And I don't want to sketch a field that is characterized by scarcity and competition. I think that's really dangerous. But people do look for what's different. And we do want to be, as players, sometimes challenged in a deeper sense, not just Twitch skill, not just maybe puzzle solving ability, but in terms of meaning, what does it mean? So if you can land on concepts and themes that are insightful and so thought-provoking and meaningful and deep in that sense, and you find the mechanics and the art and other means of expression that are quite unique to games as a medium, you don't have to have big, super polished productions to still leave an imprint and to get people thinking and feeling. And I think that should be a hopeful thing. So Equasia was a game about substance abuse, the first metaphorical game that I made many years ago with a team of students from Singapore, from MIT, from Berklee School of Music, and Rusch School of Art and Design. It's a really, really good team. And we struggled a lot. We had 9 weeks of development time. And after week 4, we still barely had a prototype because we were banging our heads so much against how can we model addiction in a metaphorical way and not be too on the nose and not be too obscure and get people to actually associate with the character and feel what we want them to feel. And it was so interesting, and we learned so much, and we almost despaired, but we made it. And it was actually one of the most successful games that came out of that round of prototypes at Gambit in that year, even though almost everybody on the staff and the other students had given up on us. Yeah, but we stuck with it, we figured it out. And then having some kind of credibility as designers established through this project and then other follow-up stuff, we made Elude, a game about communicating the experience of depression or salient aspects of the experience of depression to friends and relatives of people who struggle with depression, just to help them understand what it's like. And that game was very well received, for example, at the Meaningful Play Festival. I know this is a long time ago, 2010, oh my God. But it won the Most Meaningful Game Award, and it was runner-up for People's Choice Award. And it's a 10-minute game, and it's 2D, and it's really simple, and we made it in 9 weeks, even though the actual conceptualizing of it went through so many iterations. It took much longer. It just took half a year. Then a really fun project that I did when I first came to DePaul was Zombie Yoga, which is a Kinect game where you fight zombies, which are representations of your inner fears, by doing yoga poses. So you can out-yoga your fears. And it had this really curious, weird mixture of conceptual depth and a really serious theme of somebody trying to recover their joy in life and freeing their inner child, a ballerina no less, who has lost her joy for dancing, and the zombie trope, and all of this doing it in the genre of an exercise game. But it wasn't an exercise game, it was actually a deep game, but you also did yoga. And it tried to combine the mind-body connection and work on the mind through using the body. But by anchoring all of this in this metaphorical space and using these hopefully evocative imagery, we try to do much more than just speak to the physical part. And yeah, also got quite a bit of attention. That's an outlier, this project. This is called Cure Runners, and that was a game to teach financial literacy to teens in Austria. It was a collaboration with a social entrepreneur company called 3Coins, and the actual implementation was done by a web company called Ovus, both of them in Austria, and my husband, Misha Hiesberg, and we did the conceptual design and the rule design and wrote the game design document. So this is a learning game, but it's still very metaphorical, and in a sense, I hope we smuggled some depth into that, because while it is about teaching about finances and how to manage this, there is no money in the game. So you have a scarce resource, which is cure, and you need it for everything in this post-apocalyptic environment. But we don't talk about money. We just talk about the different struggles of managing a scarce resource, of getting it, of not succumbing to the temptations of a platformer to go and get this one last thing because we definitely could make it in time. So these quick spur of the moment emotional decisions that you make, like impulse buying, that also happen in real life. Because if you just think rationally about saving, that's not very hard. We all know how to do that in theory, but in practice, in the spur of the moment, it often looks very different. So we try to get that in there as well. But it's a little bit of an outlier because it's not as much oriented around salient aspects of the human experience. But this project absolutely is right in the center of it again. It's called For the Records, and it's not just games, it's an interactive documentary that I made together with my good friend and colleague, Anuradha Rana. She's a documentary filmmaker. And it used experimental film clips and different kinds of short experimental games to, again, communicate the experience of what it's like to struggle with different mental health disorders. It's for the Best, the one in the bottom with the paper and the pill, is about ADD and needing medication to manage that and the experience of what that can be like. And it's based, all of those are based on personal stories of people who have lived experience with these disorders. Fluctuation is about managing or experiencing bipolar disorder and how alienating both sides can be to the people around you, and how to, yeah, just what that feels like from the inside. None of these games actually try to offer clear solutions. They're about exploring the possibility space of dealing with these disorders from the perspective of somebody who had it or has it. The one in the middle, that dark circle, is about OCD. So you navigate around in the labyrinth and you try to avoid dirt. And yeah, you should play them. There's a link somewhere at some point. And then the one with the garden is called Perfection. It's about eating disorder. And all of them model what it's like through a metaphorical lens, because they're all about abstract concepts, and we had to make it tangible in some way. And metaphors, so is my argument, are a really good way to make something that's abstract, elusive, when you cannot just peek into somebody's head or heart and know what they're going through. And neither can you just play a game and not know what they're going through, but you can get a glimpse into the experience of what it could be like better than when you just look at it from the outside. Soteria was a project much more pragmatic than the others, because it tried to actually teach people with anxiety disorders, like the broad range of anxiety disorders, strategies on how to deal with them. And it's based on psychology research, and it was done together with a subject matter expert on anxiety treatment. And weirdly enough, it was accepted into the independent games area of Tokyo Game Show, and we went to Tokyo, so that was kind of surprising, because the game, unfortunately, the last version is pretty, but it is also buggy. And then we worked with a hospital in Chicago on a game to re-educate preteens, older kids and preteens and young teenagers about self-care when they have sickle cell disease. So again, a metaphorical space, you're this dragon warrior type who has been cursed and you try to make it up a mountain, and you have to deal with different climates and different adverse environments, heat and dehydration and fatigue and all of that. And so you have to manage these important factors in sickle cell disease. And by doing so, we just hope to bring back awareness for what you have to do to stay as healthy and pain-free as possible when you have this affliction. And we made this, of course, together with the community at the hospital, with all the kids who are there, with the parents who are there, tested it extensively, and then released it for mobile phone. The last project I'm going to talk about is The Beautiful Story. So this is a project that I made with a domestic violence agency and together with survivors of domestic violence. And this is about how romance can turn really bad and what it feels like to be caught in a cycle of abuse. So it's misleadingly called The Beautiful Story because abuse doesn't start ugly. It starts like this ideal version of, oh, isn't this romantic and this is worth all of it? Or at least in the case of, yeah, some of the survivors, and especially the one that I worked most closely with to model her experience of it. And again, it's penguins, because what could be more romantic than the idea that you're together for your whole life, and the penguins strive to fly and they can't in real life, but in the game, when they find true love, they can fly. So they try to collect enough hearts together so they can fly. And there's this buying into the myth that you can achieve it if you just stick with it long enough and you tolerate all of the horrible things that are happening. And it's up to the player to decide when enough is enough and how to navigate the mood swings and transformations of the partner. Okay, that's almost it. So current research, I'm really fascinated by existential psychotherapy. So having been in this games for change space for a long time now and making games that try to either educate or communicate, convey ideas about all of these touchy-feely topics, I've also given a lot of talks about them at different conferences in the Games for Change Festival. I've always been asked, well, how do you prove it works? How do you prove somebody really understands depression better? How do you prove somebody really has better strategies to manage their anxiety afterwards? And how do you prove any of this has any kind of impact? And the question for proof really, really bugged me, because yes, I mean, of course, if you say this is treatment, you should be able to have some kind of numbers to back that up if you really want to make the therapy argument. But I never approach games as therapy in that sense. I approach them as art, as expression, as something that we can share, like good movies or good books or good graphic novels or music or whatever. Any kind of art form that touches us deeply has transformative potential. And I got so mad at this constant, to me, really constraining and suppressing, oppressing really question of how do you prove this works? Because then you start to design for proof and you lose a lot of the potential depth you could put into it because you just check the boxes that you can easily test for afterwards. So I got upset and I studied clinical and mental health counseling for a year in a master program at DePaul on top of being a full-time professor, just because I wanted to know, how do people change and how does psychotherapy approach change and how do they measure anything and what's realistic for a game? And more it became quite clear to me that true transformation is very often a byproduct of a relationship between people. And the idea that a game alone can carry all of that is misguided at best. That doesn't mean I don't think games can have impact. I still think games can have profound impacts. But it matters so much who plays them, at what point in their life, how ready this person is to receive what the game has to offer, and how this game ignites some intrinsically motivated change rather than something that is imposed on the player, where the player is not even asked whether they want to be transformed or not. It's non-consensual. It's like, oh, I'm gonna transform you now. I think true change happens when the player is ready and when the themes in the game resonate on a deep level. And so existential psychotherapy is all about finding your own meaning and coming to terms with identity and existential isolation and death and all of that. So the really, really big questions that concern all of us and that we all struggle with more or less at different points in our lives. And so I've started to take a lot of themes for the games I'm working on right now from existential psychotherapy and build towards an existential transformational game design framework. How can we make games that are based on psychological resonance rather than predicting or trying to force a certain kind of change that the designer has set in stone beforehand? And I've been researching myth and ritual and how the role of myth has been so important for humans, and also, I mean, not unproblematic at times, but so important for humans throughout the centuries. And what is it about myth and their archetypal imagery and their symbolism that seems to resonate across culture? And also ritual, what is it about the symbolic enactment of certain things that can ignite profound changes that speak directly to the unconscious? So lots of deep dive into Jungian ideas and then post-Jungian ideas and whatnot. And I know that this can be scientifically contested, and I don't really care, because as a game designer, I get to be creative and I can back it up into things that have worked for a really, really long time. And I try very much to look at them critically, and that's part of the research. How can we be critical about these assumptions, but also how can we have fun with them and explore them as a really rich source of inspiration to make new games, have new design approaches, offer new experiences to players, to do with them as they please, not as we think they should deal with them. That's it. That's where I'm coming from. I see you in the next video.